Hey everyone, I want to start this weekly news recap, wrapping up what happened this week. With the G20 meeting going on this week, it's definitely on everybody's radar. Treasury Secretary Steven Mnuchin has already come out and stated that the trade deal was 90% complete, but we all know to get that last bit is always the hardest. But before the meeting, Chinese President Xi has presented President Trump with a set of terms that the US would have to meet before China is ready to continue their trade talks. Some of these conditions include the removal of the ban on the sale of American technologies to Huawei and to lift all punitive tariffs. They also stated to stop trying to get China to buy more US exports than what was discussed back in December. But on the Huawei news, Micron reported excellent earnings this week as they have resumed shipments to Huawei. How, you might ask? Apparently they found a legal workaround, and Qualcomm and Intel has also started shipping components to Huawei as well. They're able to do this through the ownership of companies overseas, because by building it in foreign countries and containing less than 25% of US made materials, they can classify their products as foreign, and while being classified as foreign, the export restrictions wouldn't apply. In Fed news this week, we had James Bullard come out saying that the July rate cut should be limited to 1/4 of a point, where the market was hoping for a 50 basis point cut in July. And Fed Chairman Powell said that the central bank will take a wait-and-see approach before making any policy changes, as they do not want to overreact to any individual data point. The rich may be getting another tax cut in the form of a cut to their capital gains tax. How it works is that any profits from investments would be indexed to inflation, so any profits they make from appreciation from inflation would not be taxed. But whether they get this through or not is unknown, as they will most likely be facing legal challenges, as the top 1% households would realize about 86% of the benefits. In Iran news, President Trump has imposed more sanctions to prevent the Iran Supreme Leader access to financial resources after Iran shot down a US drone last week. This measure was also taken to discourage them from developing nuclear weapons, as they are just days away from exceeding their maximum amount permitted of enriched uranium. Iran saw these sanctions as a means to the end of a path of diplomacy between the US and Iran, and have threatened to exceed the maximum amount of enriched uranium permitted. During Friday, there was a meeting held in Vienna between Britain, France, Germany, Russia, and China in an attempt to save this 2015 nuclear deal, but Iran said they would not accept any artificial solution to the US sanctions. Crude oil jumps up to almost $60 a barrel after the EI reports crude inventories fell 12.8 million barrels versus the expected draw of 2.4 million barrels. But on Friday, crude oil pulls back after the European parties said they would try to help normalize trade with Iran despite the US sanctions. Bitcoin has been on a tear this week and has rallied past $13,000 on Wednesday, following the recent enthusiasm by Facebook's entry into the cryptocurrency. There has been so much activity on Bitcoin this week that the popular cryptocurrency trading platform Coinbase was down for a short period of time. It was also during that time that Bitcoin was dropping and dropped around $3,000 by Thursday morning. We have more news on big tech this week. On Monday, we had 2 senators introduce a new bill on Monday to require tech giants to disclose the type of data they collect and how it's being used, and the value of the user's data every 90 days. On top of that, they will have to give the user the right to delete some, if not all, of the collected data. San Francisco may be the first city in the US to ban e-cigarettes, as they claim there's just too much they don't know about the health impacts from these products, and there's just too many teens vaping now. But the ban may not be permanent, as it will depend on the FDA's assessment, which is likely in 2022. Many US banks have increased their quarterly dividend and stock buyback this week after passing the Fed stress test. Goldman Sachs has had one of the largest dividend increases. They increased their dividend by almost 50% and increased their stock buyback to $7 billion. Most of the other banks increased their dividend about 10 to 20%, but some have really ramped up their stock buyback, with JP Morgan and Bank of America at around $30 billion. In Apple news this week, they announced that the Chief Design Officer, Johnny Ives, will be leaving Apple later this year to start his own design company called Love From, and will include Apple as their client. John Ives has led the design team since 1996 and has pretty much designed all the Apple products we know of today. In Canadian news this week, if you recall last week, China halted the pork imports from Canada because they found a restricted feed additive in the Canadian pork. This week, we found out that when the Canadian Food Inspection Agency asked to review the export certificate, it was found out to be fake. On top of that, they think the shipment was even unlikely to come from Canada. Air Canada has been in talks to acquire Air Transat for $13 a share for a while now, and this week Air Transat has finally agreed to be taken over by Air Canada for $13 a share, even though they had a higher bid at $14 a share. but the deal will have to go through some regulatory hurdles as there just isn't many airline players in Canada, and by consolidating two larger players in the space, it does not bode well for competition. Michigan Attorney General has filed a lawsuit against Enbridge against its oil pipeline, Line 5 to be exact, the one located in the Great Lakes, as it poses unacceptable risk to the Great Lakes if it leaks. Enbridge is trying to settle this by offering to build a tunnel to house the underwater portion of the pipeline, but Michigan refused to accept the offer or even talk about that option. OFG Bancorp has agreed to purchase Scotiabank's Puerto Rico operations for $550 million and US Virgin Islands operations for a $10 million deposit. In the past 4 years, Scotiabank has been divesting away from the Caribbean countries to focus back on its core footprint. Overall, this week was a pretty flat week. We started off heading lower with the news of new sanctions on Iran and less optimism on a 50 basis point rate cut. And on top of that, a lot of analysts are not expecting a trade deal from China during the G20 meeting, but they are expecting to halt any additional tariffs as they continue to negotiate a deal. Market moves back up, boosted by the financial sector as the banks increase the quarterly dividend and stock buyback. On top of that, great Micron earnings as they found a legal workaround the Huawei ban. Crude oil also starts the week off with a big move up as we just saw the largest crude inventory drawdown in nearly 3 years. And as always, if you like this series, please like and subscribe, and thank you for watching. I'll see you in the next video.